When BMW decided to build its first real superbike, it did not start with a blank sheet of paper. It went out and bought a Suzuki. Engineers in Munich got hold of a 2005 Gixxer 1000, took it apart, measured everything, and used it as the benchmark for the bike that eventually became the S1000RR. Imagine being so good at your job that your competition just buys your homework. That is the kind of reputation this machine carries. But the full story is a lot messier than one perfect year. Over 2.5 decades, the Gixxer 1000 went from class killer to punchline to a bike Suzuki quietly stopped selling in Europe altogether. And then, against all odds, it came back. So this is every generation of the Gixxer 1000. What actually changed, and which ones are worth your money today? Quick bit of housekeeping first, because the naming trips people up constantly. Suzuki labels these bikes with a letter and a number tied to the model year. K1 is 2001. K2 is 2002. That runs all the way to K9 in 2009, then the letter rolls over. So 2010 becomes L0, 2011 is L1, 2012 is L2, and onward. So when somebody in a comment section says they ride an L7, they mean a 2017 bike. And when somebody says K5 in that slightly reverent tone, like they are talking about a dead relative, you are about to hear a very long story. Just nod, it is easier. The other thing worth knowing is where this bike came from. Suzuki had been building Gixxer models since 1985, starting with the 750 that basically invented the modern race replica. The big bore version was the Gixxer 1100, and by the late 90s, that thing was a heavyweight in a class that had moved on without it. Honda got there first with the lightweight idea. Then Yamaha dropped the R1 in 1998 and rewrote the rulebook for what a leader bike was supposed to be. Suzuki spent 3 years watching from the sidelines. Then it answered. Number 1. The K1 and K2. The 2001 Gixxer 1000 was not really a new design, so much as a very clever piece of arithmetic. Suzuki took the Gixxer 750, which was already one of the sharpest chassis on the planet, thickened the mainframe spars by 0.5 millimeter for extra rigidity, and dropped in a bigger engine. Displacement landed at 988 cc, which is an odd number for a bike badged 1000. The theory that gets repeated most is that Suzuki left headroom because MotoGP was capped at 990 cc at the time, and there was a chance the factory prototype might have been an inline 4. The numbers were absurd for 2001, around 160 horsepower, roughly 170 kilograms dry, a package that weighed only about 10 pounds more than the 750 it was based on. The engine itself was the same width as the 750 motor. Suzuki managed that by keeping the crankshaft the same length and stacking the gearbox shafts vertically, which is why these bikes are so narrow between your knees. On the road, it was violent in a way the R1 simply was not. Testers of the era measured a quarter mile in the low 10s at over 140 miles per hour and a top speed knocking on 179. Motorcycle Daily called it the new benchmark in the open class and said anyone stepping off an R1 would know immediately which bike was faster. Dyno charts from the period showed the Suzuki holding a 5 to 10 horsepower advantage over everything else from around 7,500 RPM all the way to the peak. In 2001, that is not a win. That is bullying. It was not perfect. Race teams found the chassis did not steer as crisply as the 750, despite Suzuki insisting they were the same, and the 6-piston Tokiko front calipers were expensive to service and never quite delivered the bite the engine deserved. The K2 of 2002 was mechanically identical with new graphics, and in some markets, a stainless header replaced the titanium one. These days, first-generation bikes actually command a premium over the 2 generations that followed, purely because collectors want the original. Number 2. The K3 and K4. For 2003, Suzuki did not chase headline horsepower. It went after the complaints. The frame was reworked for rigidity and switched from bare aluminum to black. Seat height and overall height came down. Ride geometry was calmed slightly to settle the steering. The forks got a black diamond-like carbon coating in place of the gold nitride finish on the K1. The headline change was at the front wheel. The K3 ditched those 6-piston calipers for radially mounted 4-piston units on smaller 300mm discs, making it the first leader bike on the market with radial brakes. That change alone stripped a meaningful chunk of unsprung weight off the front end and transformed how the bike turned in. Inside the engine, Suzuki drilled 4 ventilation holes between the cylinders to equalize crankcase pressure under the pistons, which cut pumping losses and lifted torque at high revs. The camshafts were rifle drilled with a larger bit to shed weight. The engine control unit jumped from 16-bit to 32-bit with new 4-hole injectors and revised throttle bodies, and the whole exhaust system went titanium apart from the muffler shell. Headlights were remounted vertically, so the ram air ducts could sit 20 millimeters closer to the center line where the pressure is highest. That is engineers moving a headlight to chase air pressure. That is genuinely obsessive behavior. Net result, around 164 horsepower and 168 kilograms dry. 2 more horsepower, 2 kilos lighter, and a genuinely better motorcycle. In 2003, that was enough to stay on top. The problem was 2004. Honda, Kawasaki, and Yamaha all launched brand new leader bikes that year, and the K4, which was a pure carryover, suddenly found itself mid-pack. Today, the K3 and K4 are the forgotten generation, which is exactly why they are the cheapest way into a genuinely quick early Gixxer. Number 3. The K5 and K6. This is the one. If you have spent any time in motorcycle comment sections, you already know the K5 has a following that borders on religious. There are Facebook groups with thousands of members dedicated to a 20-year-old Suzuki. There is a guy in there posting a photo of the same clean K5 every Sunday morning with no caption. People have poured tens of thousands into keeping single examples pristine. And the frustrating thing is, the hype is mostly justified. For 2005, Suzuki stopped treating the 1000 as a stretched 750 and designed it as a leader bike from the ground up. The engine was new, with the bore opened up by 1.3 millimeters to bring capacity to a full 999 cc, while keeping a long 59 millimeter stroke. Compression went up, titanium valves and lighter pistons went in, with chrome nitride-coated rings running in Suzuki's own composite cylinder lining. The crank and rods were strengthened. Somehow the whole motor came out about 4 pounds lighter than the one it replaced. Claimed output was 178 horsepower at 11,000 RPM and 87 pound-feet at 9,000, with a dry weight of 166 kilograms. But peak numbers missed the point. The long-stroke layout gave it a torque curve that just pulled, everywhere, all the time. Where the R1 and the ZX-10R needed to be wrung out to give you their best, the Suzuki just drove off corners. Real-world dyno figures put it around 162 horsepower at the wheel, which is still competitive with plenty of bikes sold today. The chassis was equally serious. Suzuki stacked the gearbox to shorten the engine, which allowed a longer swing arm inside a shorter wheelbase, and pulled mass toward the center and low in the frame. Radially mounted 4-piston calipers stayed, a back torque-limiting slipper clutch appeared for the first time, and a titanium silencer kept the weight down. There was no traction control. No ride-by-wire, no ABS, no rider modes, just you, a throttle cable, and a very fast motorcycle. Then it won. Troy Corser took the 2005 World Superbike title on one, which remains the only World Superbike championship any Gixxer 1000 has ever won. And when BMW went looking for a benchmark to develop the S1000RR, this is the bike they studied hardest. Respect. The K6 of 2006 was a color change and nothing else, plus a couple of limited runs including an all-black Phantom with a road-legal Yoshimura can. If you are enjoying this breakdown, hit subscribe, because generation by generation deep dives like this one are the entire point of this channel, and there is a lot more coming. Now about what happened next, because from here the story gets complicated. Number 4. The K7 and K8. Euro 3 emissions arrived, and the Gixxer 1000 got fat. That is the short version, and it is the version most riders still repeat. But it is not the whole truth. The 2007 bike gained a pair of enormous twin mufflers, stuffed with the hardware needed to clean up the exhaust. Dry weight went from 166 kilograms to 172, so roughly 6 kilos of pure emissions tax. The wheelbase grew. The geometry was calmed further. To a lot of people, the bike simply looked wrong, and forums at the time were full of K6 owners telling anyone who would listen that Suzuki had peaked and they should go buy leftover stock while it lasted. Underneath, though, the K7 was doing real work. Hollow camshafts and a more compact dual throttle valve system saved weight. Intake ports were opened up by about 10%, and exhaust ports by 20%. 12-hole injectors and iridium plugs improved combustion. The red line climbed, and claimed output rose to roughly 185 horsepower. The clutch went hydraulic. More importantly, this is where the Gixxer got electronics. The K7 was the first Japanese production bike with switchable power modes, called the Drive Mode Selector. Mode A gave you everything. Mode B softened things below around 9,000 RPM before handing back full power at full throttle. Mode C strangled the bike down to roughly 110 horsepower, which testers of the day described fairly accurately as turning your superbike into an SV650. You paid leader bike money for a switch that gives you a commuter. Somebody out there uses that setting daily and loves it. So the K7 was heavier, some people thought it was uglier, and it was objectively more capable. It also happened to be the first Gixxer with an electronically controlled steering damper, a Kayaba unit fed by speed, engine revs, and gear position, and by all accounts, it worked brilliantly. It also happened to be the bike Matt Mladen and Ben Spies used to absolutely batter the AMA Superbike paddock. If you shot for one used, check the exhaust valve in the collector for sticking, and budget for an aftermarket system, because most of that weight gain lives in the pipes. Number 5. The K9, L0, and L1. For 2009, Suzuki delivered a genuinely all-new motorcycle, and then styled it so conservatively that half the market assumed it was a graphics update. Tank, seat, fairing, wheels, engine, exhausts, suspension, electronics, and dash were all new. One reviewer at the time called it the darkest of dark horses, which sums it up. The engineering goal was packaging. Suzuki shrank the engine by around 60 millimeters front to back, mostly by pulling the crank and gearbox output shaft closer together, a trick borrowed from the redesigned 600 and 750. That freed up room for a longer swing arm while actually shortening the wheelbase by 10 millimeters, which meant more rear grip and more stability without the bike becoming a bus. The motor went over square for the first time. Bore grew to 74.5 millimeters. Stroke dropped to 57.3. Compression rose to 12.8 to 1, and the titanium valves grew a millimeter, 12-hole injectors, shorter intake manifolds, a new crankshaft with better lubrication, dual valve springs, and stronger pistons all pointed at the same goal, which was giving race teams an engine that could safely rev harder and be tuned further. On the chassis side, you got a new banana-style swing arm, monoblock Tokiko calipers, a fully adjustable Showa shock, an onboard lap timer, and low-slung twin titanium silencers. The clutch went back to cable operation for feel and weight. Here is the awkward part. Suzuki claimed the same power as before, but independent dyno runs showed the K9 down around 7 horsepower at the wheel compared to the outgoing bike, with a softer mid-range. On track that made it easier to ride hard. On a spec sheet, against rivals who were now fitting traction control, it looked like a step sideways. Suzuki ran this design for 3 model years, because the development money that used to buy horsepower was now going into emissions compliance. 2 things to check on the used market. Some early K9 bikes, particularly ones with track history, have reported crankshaft failures. And there was a recall covering front brake master cylinders on models built between 2004 and 2013, plus a separate transmission recall affecting bikes from 2009 to 2014. Ask for paperwork. Number 6. The L2 through the L6. 2012 was refinement rather than redesign, and Suzuki was completely open about that. The most obvious change was the exhaust. The twin cans and the under-engine chamber went away, replaced by a 4-into-2-into-1 stainless system feeding a single titanium silencer. That alone narrowed the bike by 15 millimeters and took a real chunk of weight off. Inside, Suzuki used finite element and fatigue analysis techniques borrowed from its MotoGP program to design pistons 11% lighter than before. Compression nudged up to 12.9 to 1. Valve tappets lost 2.5 grams each. The exhaust cam profile was revised for slightly less valve overlap. The crankcase breather vents were reshaped. None of that added peak power, and Suzuki never claimed it would. The goal was throttle response, mid-range, and fuel economy, and the remapped engine control unit cut consumption by around 8%. MotoGP technology, deployed to save you money at the pump. Beautiful. The other headline was brakes. Gold Brembo monoblock calipers replaced the Tokikos, gripping discs 0.5 millimeter thinner to save unsprung weight. The front axle lost 39 grams. The front tire got lighter. Total saving was about 2 kilograms, bringing curb weight to roughly 203 kilograms. Ride it, and the story is consistent across almost every review. Enormous grunt. Superb brakes. A chassis that is stable and trustworthy rather than telepathic. And an engine that owners felt was choked by a catalytic converter welded permanently into the system, which made freeing it up expensive. And this is where the Gixxer started falling behind. Through 2016, the bike still had no traction control, no ABS, no inertial sensors, and no quick shifter. while BMW, Yamaha, and Kawasaki were stacking their bikes with electronics. What it did have was value. If you wanted the most motorcycle per pound spent, this was arguably it. And used L2 through L6 bikes remain one of the best deals in the class right now. Number 7. The L7 and the Gixxer 1000R. After 8 years, Suzuki finally answered. The 2017 bike was new from the crankcases up, and the centerpiece was something no rival had. Suzuki called the package the Broad Power System, and the star of it is variable valve timing lifted from the Gixxer-R MotoGP bike. Most systems like this are hydraulic or electronic. Suzuki's is purely mechanical. 12 steel balls sit in curved grooves inside the intake cam sprocket assembly. As revs climb past around 10,000, centrifugal force flings those balls outward. The grooves align differently, and the intake cam timing retards to boost top-end power. No sensors, no solenoids, and importantly, no conflict with racing rules that ban electronic and hydraulic variable timing. Suzuki looked at the rulebook, found the loophole, and filled it with marbles. The valve train changed too, from bucket tappets to F1-style pivoting finger followers. Each follower is 6 grams lighter than the tappet it replaced, and because it pivots on a fixed shaft, its effective moving mass is around 3 grams. Less mass means more lift, more revs, better valve control. The numbers followed. Bore out to 76 millimeters, stroke down to 55.1, capacity 999.8 cc, compression 13.2 to 1, redline up 1,000 revs to 14,500, and claimed output of 202 horsepower at 13,200 RPM. The frame was 10% lighter and more compact, and the whole engine was rotated 6 degrees more upright to sharpen front-end feel. Then the electronics. Ride-by-wire throttle, a 6-axis inertial measurement unit, 10-stage traction control, cornering-aware braking, drive modes, and low RPM assist. The R model added launch control, a bi-directional quickshifter, Showa balance-free forks and rear shock, braided brake lines, and a cutaway top yoke. The base model kept standard Showa big piston forks, no quickshifter, and a simpler ABS. Both got an LCD dash rather than the color screens rivals were fitting. Reviewers loved it. Suzuki was back in the fight. But here's the thing, okay? Almost immediately, nothing happened. The bike received essentially no significant updates for 8 years. Euro 5 arrived, and the Gixxer 1000 did not comply. Suzuki filed an end-of-series derogation to keep selling non-compliant stock for 2 extra years, and when that ran out in January 2023, the bike vanished from Europe and the UK entirely, with a limited run of Black Phantom models as the last ones on dealer floors. Gone. Suzuki also walked away from MotoGP and World Superbike. In America, the bike stayed on sale, slowly gathering dust and nothing else. Number 8. The 2026 comeback. Then in the summer of 2025, at the Suzuka 8 Hours of all places, Suzuki brought it back. The timing was not an accident, because 2025 marked 40 years since the original Gixxer 750. The 999.8cc engine keeps its variable valve timing and finger followers, but the internals were reworked to pass Euro 5+. Compression rises from 13.2 to 1 up to 13.8 to 1. There is a new crankshaft, new pistons and rods, a wider cam chain to handle load with less friction, and a revised fuel pump and injectors. Suzuki was upfront that the goal was compliance without killing the character, and also giving race teams a stronger base to tune from. The claimed figure is around 192 horsepower at 13,200 RPM, with roughly 81 pound-feet at 11,000, which is down on the outgoing bike. That is going to bother the spec sheet crowd, and it is a fair criticism. But every manufacturer is paying the same emissions tax right now. Electronics got a proper overhaul. There is a Bosch inertial measurement unit, cornering ABS, multi-stage traction with an integrated lift limiter and roll torque control, launch control, a bi-directional quickshifter, ride-by-wire with adjustable modes, easy start, and a lightweight lithium-ion battery. There is a slimmer titanium muffler that cleans up the tail, and there are optional dry carbon winglets developed on the endurance bike Suzuki raced at Suzuka in 2024, which bolt on if you want them and stay in the box if you do not, which is a genuinely sensible way to handle the most divisive styling trend in motorcycling. What it still does not have is a color TFT dash. Suzuki kept an LCD panel styled after the MotoGP bike's display. Depending on who you ask, that is either lazy or refreshingly honest. The R model gets the higher-grade Showa suspension and LED position lights, and in Europe the R is the only version being offered. The paint schemes are all callbacks. Blue and white for the Mladen-era Yoshimura bikes, red and white that has people shouting, "Schwanz!" and a yellow and blue option, each carrying anniversary badging on the tank, fairing, seat, and muffler. So that is the ARC, and it is a strange one. Suzuki built the fastest liter bike in the world in 2001, refined it into something close to perfect by 2005, spent a decade being punished by emissions rules it kept absorbing instead of engineering around, then produced the most technically interesting engine in the class in 2017, and promptly left it alone for 8 years. Here is the honest summary. If you want the legend and you can accept zero electronic safety net, the K5 and K6 deserve every bit of the hype, but prices have already moved, and clean ones are getting rare. If you want the most motorcycle for the least money, the L2 through L6 years are the smart buy, especially with those Brembo brakes. If you want a modern superbike with a genuinely unique engine, the L7 and the R are absurd value used right now because nobody was paying attention. And if you want the new one, you are buying the most refined Gixxer 1000 ever built, just not the most powerful one on paper. The Gixxer 1000 has never actually been the bike with the biggest number. It has been the bike that made the number usable. 25 years on, that has not changed. If this was useful, subscribe, hit that like button, and if this one performs, the next teardown is every Honda CBR 1000 RR Fireblade generation, which is the exact bike the Gixxer spent 20 years fighting. See you in the next one.